You know, there was a time in 770 by the Rebbe where the sukkah next to 770 simply was not big enough or safe enough for the crowds. And so the Rebbe would not have a public gathering in the sukkah. But he wanted to speak to the people who were there for mincha or for ma'ariv and whatever. So he would speak, but he wouldn't sit down. Because the mitzvah is to sit in a sukkah. So for the 8 days of sukkahs, he wouldn't sit down outside the sukkah. He's just taking the sukkah very seriously. It's also a mitzvah to sleep in the sukkah. But on the other hand, it's our custom not to sleep in the sukkah. So the Rebbe didn't sleep for 8 days. So sukkahs is a very serious business. But let's back up a little bit. We begin our day with Modeh Ani. Modeh Ani means we acknowledge that our life comes from God. We thank God for giving us back our life, another day. But there's something about the Modeh Ani that makes it very powerful and essential. Because God's name is not mentioned in the Modeh Ani. And the reason it's not mentioned is because the Modeh Ani is so basic that it precedes any name of God. When you call someone by their name, you're addressing them with a title, with a word. When you're talking to the person heart to heart, you don't use names. At best, you say you. A name is necessary to bring about some kind of a connection. You need to know a person, to identify a person, you identify them by their name. But when you're so connected to someone, you don't need a name. And even when you say the name, you don't mean it. You're not really using a name. You're just using a familiar expression. So the Modeh Ani is a very basic thing. It doesn't come from our faith. It doesn't come from our beliefs. It doesn't come from our commitments. And it doesn't come from what we learn. There's nothing sophisticated about it. It's artless. It's simply the most basic response, a reflex reaction to the fact that we're alive for another day. The Gemara says that the Modeh Ani is suggestive of the resurrection of the dead. Person wakes up in the morning after having been dead, tired, and he wakes up in the morning, it's like a resurrection from the dead. So when we say Modeh Ani every morning, it strengthens our faith in the fact that eventually there will be not only a waking from sleep, but also a waking from the earth, from the grave. That's a strange leap to suggest that waking up in the morning is similar to the resurrection of the dead. Because everybody wakes up in the morning. We've never yet seen anyone get up from the grave. So it's a real leap, a real stretch to go from Modeh Ani in the morning to the resurrection of the dead. But we'll try to explain that in a minute. The beginning of the day is a very basic reflex reaction of the soul. The beginning of the year must be similar. What is it about Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur? What is the power that this has over every Jewish heart and every Jewish soul? We know why Hanukkah is popular. We even know why Pesach is popular. It fits. It matches. But what is Yom Kippur? Why does Yom Kippur have such power over people? Why is it that people who aren't moved by anything else are moved by Yom Kippur? What's Yom Kippur? There's no special mitzvah. There's no sukkah with lights, with walls, with lulav. There's no matzah. There's no shofar. There's nothing. What's Yom Kippur? There isn't even food. And that's not Jewish. No food? It must be that the beginning of the year is so basic, it touches such a basic part of us, that it's like the Moda Ani. It doesn't have to have the name of God in it. It's just the soul being itself. And for some reason, the beginning of the year stirs that part of the soul, just like waking up in the morning, the beginning of the day stirs that part of the soul. Concerning the resurrection of the dead, it's one of the 13 principles, it's the 13th principle, that Rambam puts down as the foundations of Jewish faith. Why do we believe in the resurrection of the dead? Well, because Torah says it's going to happen, and if Torah says, then it's true, and then it must happen. Why does Torah tell us about the resurrection of the dead? There are many things Torah doesn't tell us about. There are many mysteries that the Torah doesn't share with us, like how to create a world. Torah doesn't give us all the details on how to do that. Why does the Torah tell us that there's going to be a resurrection? Why do we need to know this? We need to know this because it is an essential part of justice. The justice is every person contributed towards the perfection of the world, maybe not a lot, but something, that person deserves a reward. And to say that the person serves his purpose and then dies and that's the end, where's the justice? So it's not merely a little trivia about concerning the future. You know what's going to happen in the end? They're all going to get up. It's more than that. We have to believe that in the end, those who died will come back, because how are they going to be rewarded? Not rewarded? Well, that's not justice. So it's simply a sense of rightness, a sense of fair play, that those who died are not dead forever. They must come back to receive their reward. Now, who comes back and who doesn't come back? When we say the world to come, there are two parts. There's what happens immediately after a person passes away, and then there's what's going to happen in the end of days. What happens immediately when a person passes away is that the soul goes to heaven and the body goes back to the earth. The soul goes to heaven, and that is a great reward for the soul. In the end of days, there will be the resurrection, and then the reward will be body and soul. A soul in a body. It's actually easier to get into heaven than into the world to come, meaning the resurrection. The standards are more exacting, more demanding. For a ticket to the resurrection, you have to do a lot more than a ticket to heaven. On the other hand, there are some people who might never make it to heaven. But no one will be left out of the resurrection. But to get to the resurrection takes a little processing. The Mishnah says, here's the basic statement. The Mishnah says, every Jew has a portion in the world to come. That means resurrection. Every Jew that ever lived has a portion in the world to come, means that every Jew that ever lived will be resurrected in the end of days. And resurrection means body and soul. Then the Mishnah goes on and says, every Jew has a portion in the world to come, except, and it lists those people who don't have a portion in the world to come. Those who sin and lead others to sin have no portion in the world to come. Those who don't believe in the world to come have no portion in the world to come. And it goes on and on. So, does every Jew have a portion or doesn't he? What's the story? We find statements in the Gemara and in Medrash that certain people are so wicked that when they die, their soul will be burnt and nothing will be left. Well, then what happened to the statement, every Jew has a portion in the world to come? We're told, for example, that all the Jews who came out of Egypt but didn't enter the land, who died in the desert, they have no portion in the world to come. That's a big exception. Every Jew has a portion in the world to come, except all those Jews who came out of Egypt. How many came out of Egypt? So many that it frightened the Egyptians. Remember? Why did they enslave us? Because our numbers were getting so big, they were threatened. That's not 50 people. That's about 2 million people. So every Jew has a portion in the world to come, like every one of the 14 million, except 2 million. Well, then it's not every Jew. There's another statement that says that those people who built the tower, the generation that built that tower of Babel, they have no portion in the world to come. We're getting pretty slim here. The truth is, though, that a person who loses his portion in the world to come forfeits his portion in the world to come. If he does tshuva, if he corrects his ways, then he regains his portion in the world to come. In fact, Rambam says that a person who was sinful all his life, and on his deathbed repented, regretted, did tshuva, gets his portion in the world to come. But listen to this. Even if he repents in his heart, but outwardly nothing changes, he has his portion in the world to come. Let's take that a step further. A person who all his life was sinful and on his deathbed had no regrets, except maybe that he didn't live long enough to sin some more. So he had no tshuva, he had no regrets, not in his heart, not outside, not inside, nowhere. But his children were good Jews. He has a portion in the world to come. If his children pray for him, he certainly has a portion in the world to come. But even if they don't pray for him, they just do their own mitzvahs and they're good Jews, he has a portion in the world to come. Because the Gemara says, more than the father can do for the son can do for the father. What can the father do for the son? He can pray for him. And the son can pray for the father. But what can the son do for the father that the father can't do for the son? Just being a good Jew brings your father into the world to come, even if he didn't deserve it. So, all these people who died in the desert, they had pretty good kids. So they have a portion in the world to come. Suppose a guy is bad all his life, and on his deathbed has no regrets, and his children are worse than him. Now what? If he suffers, he regains his portion in the world to come. The Gemara makes an amazing statement. There were certain very, very wicked people in the days of the temple, the kings in Israel. They were very bad, and the Gemara says they don't have a portion in the world to come. Except that during one of the sieges of Jerusalem, when they were destroying the city, I don't know if it was under the Babylonians or under the Romans, they set fire to the city, and the cemetery was destroyed, and these people's bodies were consumed by the fire. Well, that's enough suffering. They got their portion in the world to come back. It's not like they did tshuva, it's not like their children did tshuva, it's not like anybody prayed for them, but they suffered this unnecessary embarrassment of their bodies being violated after their death. Well, that's enough suffering. And so they get their portion in the world to come. The Medrash says that the people who left Egypt and died in the desert have no portion in the world to come, but since Moshe is buried with them in the desert, and he is going to get up and be resurrected when the time comes, he doesn't want to go without his people, so okay, they can come too. So we see that a tzaddik, who is responsible for his people, who is the shepherd of his people, if he's going, they're going too, regardless of their own personal worthiness or unworthiness and so on. So now, who doesn't have a portion in the world to come? Somebody who sinned all his life, had no regrets, which is already rare. What kind of Jew doesn't regret? What kind of human being doesn't regret once the fun is over? You know what I mean? On his deathbed, everybody regrets, full of regrets. But okay, this guy's really stubborn. He doesn't regret. And his kids are no good, or he doesn't have any kids. And there's no one to pray for him. And the tzaddik of the generation doesn't like him. And nothing happens to him that causes him to suffer unnaturally. What's going to get him into the world to come? That kind of a person really doesn't have a portion in the world to come. But now we're down to a very rare individual. But even this person, Kabbalah says, what does it mean he has no portion in the world to come? It means that his body, that body will not be resurrected, but his soul will certainly come back. Only it'll be in a new body, not the body that sinned. So in worst case, really bad circumstances, it's the body that won't be resurrected, but a soul, the soul always comes back. If it needs a new body, it gets a new body. Once we reach this understanding, we realize something about all of resurrection, not just this rare individual. Resurrection is not only something we believe in because Torah tells us it's going to happen. And it doesn't happen only because people deserve it. And if they don't deserve it, they're not going to have it. It doesn't happen unnaturally. But as a matter of fact, resurrection is necessary by nature. A godly soul is an eternal soul. It's an eternal being. The godly soul is, first of all, a living being, and a living being can't die. That which is life can't die. Secondly, in addition to being a living being, it is also a divine being. A godly being. And a godly being means a being with purpose. Because the one thing we know about God that transcends everything else is that God has a purpose. God existed without the world. He was doing fine, I'm sure. I'm assuming. And yet he created the world. Which means that he was not content without a purpose. So the godly soul has that same nature. It is not content. It can't be without a purpose. Being in heaven is without purpose. It's pleasant, it's beautiful, it's nice, but it's without purpose. So by its very nature, a godly soul cannot stop existing, and it cannot stay in heaven forever. And therefore the resurrection is simply a necessary thing. It's not something you earn by being good. But by being bad, you can interfere. You can obstruct the process. But in the end, it must happen. So now we have a completely different view of the resurrection. Just like a body today, being that it's physical, being that it's mortal, being that it's limited and finite, must return to the earth from which it comes. In the same way, the soul, by its very nature, must return to earth eternally, because that's what a godly soul is. It is eternal, and it can't stay in heaven for very long. So in the debate between the authorities, between the commentaries, as to what is the ultimate reward, what happens in heaven or what happens in the resurrection. There are two opinions. One opinion says, and I think that's Rambam, Rambam says that the ultimate reward is in heaven, not on earth. And that the resurrection is not the biggest reward. Because how much of a reward can a body take? But a soul in heaven, well, the soul in heaven can absorb infinite goodness. But a body, even after the resurrection, it's finite. How much can it absorb? So the ultimate reward will be in heaven, not on earth. But Kabbalah says that the ultimate reward is on earth. It may not be as infinite, but it's much more meaningful to the soul to be purposeful. And it can only be purposeful in a body. So the purpose far outweighs the amount of reward. The quality of it outweighs the quantity. So this is what the resurrection really is. So when we say that the Moda Ani is a hint, a suggestion of the resurrection, what we're basically talking about is imperatives. The Moda Ani is not something we say because we're inspired. You're not inspired the minute you wake up in the morning. Most people aren't. It's not an inspired expression. It's an imperative. If you're alive, you must be conscious of where your life came from. It doesn't take a lot of meditation. In the same way, Yom Kippur, the beginning of the year, Rosh Hashanah, even Sukkot and Simchas Torah, these are all imperatives. This is the nature of the Jewish soul. We are who we are, and we can't help being aware of it at least sometime during the year. So when Yom Kippur comes around, we're simply aware of our Jewishness because we're Jewish. So it doesn't come as a result of learning or of studying or even of doing mitzvahs in the course of the year. Yom Kippur does it because we can't help it. We can't help being Jewish. So when Yom Kippur comes around, we feel that Jewishness that we cannot resist. And that's why it doesn't take a scholar to be moved by Yom Kippur. And the same thing is with the resurrection. The resurrection is not some great leap of faith. We believe in the coming of Mashiach, which is a leap of faith. Then we believe in the resurrection after Mashiach, which is an even greater leap of faith. It's not. It's an imperative. If we know who we are, if we know the nature of our soul, then there's no debate and there's no question. It's inevitable that the soul comes back. And the soul has to come back in a body. Because being on earth without a body is no fun. You might as well stay in heaven if you're going to do that. So now, what exactly does the resurrection mean in practical, graphic terms? When God tells Moshe that he's going to die before entering the promised land, Moshe argues, prays, demands to stay alive, to remain alive. And there's this whole conversation between Moshe and God. One of the things that God says to Moshe is, you have to die, because if you don't die, how am I going to resurrect you? Which is like the husband who says to his wife, if you don't go away, how am I going to miss you? What kind of answer is that? You have to die so that you can be resurrected. Well, if I'm already here, don't resurrect me. Just let me live. What is the point of dying only to be resurrected? So Kabbalah says, our lives today, the condition of our bodies today, is such that the body really can't live very long. And the reason for that is because we ate from the tree of knowledge. And that effect lingers in our bodies, and that's why we're mortal, the bodies. What is going to happen in the resurrection? God is going to recreate the world, so to speak. When God first created Adam and Eve, their bodies were immortal before they ate from the tree. They became mortal only because they absorbed the fruit from the tree. Resurrection means a body comes back without the tree. Since it's not born to a person who is a descendant of Adam and Eve, when it is resurrected, it comes to life without the influence of that tree. And then there's no reason for it ever to die. Which means that the life of the body in the resurrection is a completely different life than the one we have now. So Adam lived to be 930 years. It's a long time, but it wasn't the real thing anymore. The body wasn't truly alive, even though it was kept alive for 1,000 years. But in the resurrection, it's not just that we will live forever. It'll be a completely different kind of life that the body will have. To such a degree that the Medrash makes this incredible statement. Today, the body gets life from the soul. After the resurrection, the soul will get life from the body. I have no idea what that means. First of all, why does a soul need to get life? A soul is alive. And if it needs more life, how is the body going to have more life than the soul, enough to give life to the soul? Obviously, life in the resurrection is so much different from the life we have now that we can't imagine. How can a body be more alive than its soul? We'll find out. We'll find out when it happens. But this we do understand. The reason the soul comes back to earth is because it has no purpose without a body. Today, when the soul is in the body gives the soul purpose, but the soul gives the body life. In the resurrection, the body is not going to need life from the soul. But the soul will still need the body to give it purpose. So the body will be one step ahead of the soul. It'll have a life of its own, but it'll be able to give the soul a purpose. What's the soul going to do for the body? Not much. Because the body has its own life. So this is the kind of picture that we're supposed to carry with us. Real life, not artificial life, not borrowed life. The life of the body today is borrowed. Real life means that life is the body itself, which is the way it was created to be. So the resurrection is really a return to the pre-tree condition. Except for one thing. To simply go back to the way things were in the beginning, it's kind of like, so what was the point? Jerry Seinfeld says about horse racing. He says, he wonders what the horse is thinking. The horse doesn't understand the race. All he knows is that the jockey is in a hurry to get somewhere. So he tries really hard. And he ends up right back where they started from. And he was thinking, well, wait a minute. We were here all along. What was the purpose of that? So to say, God created us perfect, we blew it, but we'll get back to being perfect again. So what's the point? Obviously, the process must be very valuable. And in the end, we go back to the same state, but a much improved state. So that not only will we go back to the condition where life is real to the body and not borrowed, but that after all these years of refining the body, of getting a body to fulfill mitzvahs in some very uncomfortable ways, to the body, like Sukkah in Minnesota or Alaska. The body doesn't enjoy this, and yet the body does the mitzvah. And without the body, you can't do the mitzvah. So after 5,000 years of this, the body comes back to being really alive, but much wiser, much deeper, much more godly. Because 5,000 years of serving God doesn't go unnoticed in the body. It's almost like saying a Jewish child today, in his very body, feels for mitzvahs. Because all the years that his ancestors have been doing mitzvahs, it becomes a permanent feature in the body, so that when we inherit our godly soul from our Jewish mother, we also inherit a history of mitzvahs. And that's why many times a Jew puts on tefillin for the first time, and it feels familiar. And there is no explanation. It feels familiar to the body, not to the mind. The mind doesn't know what this is. How do you do this? Why? What am I doing? But the body feels comfortable. Because how many tefillin, how many times have the arms been wrapped in tefillin over the last 3,000 years? So a Jewish arm, the arm of a Jewish baby, feels comfortable with tefillin. That's something we will appreciate when the time comes, but it's an amazing thought. So 5,000 years of being mortal and then going back to immortality, it's an immortality squared. It's immortal plus. So it must be worth the effort. The reward must be worth the suffering. 5,000 years worth of it. So we can imagine that life after the resurrection will be way beyond our wildest dreams. And it has to happen. It's imperative. It's the only way the story can end. The story of the Jewish soul. So this is what this season is all about. It's the beginning of the year. It's like the beginning of the day. We're waking up. And when we wake up, our initial reactions, our impulse reactions, are indestructible. You can't argue them, you can't debate them, you can't doubt them. They're just reflexes. And 2,000 years of being scattered all over the world and being disrupted in our tradition and our passing on of the tradition, living here, after all of that, Yom Kippur still has such an impact on people. There's only one explanation. It's imperative. It has nothing to do with our opinions or with our experiences or religiosity. It's just what we are. And what we are won't go away. I was looking at a bookstore in the airport. There's a new book that just came out about Sandy Koufax. The man was a good baseball player. Maybe the best. But you know what it says on the cover? Completely secular book. What it says on the cover about Sandy Koufax? The guy who wouldn't pitch on Yom Kippur. And people still can't, yeah, and people still can't get over it. So Sean Green says he won't play on Yom Kippur either. Sure, it's easy to say now. But this is what left an impression on the minds of certainly every Jew. And why? Why didn't he pitch on Yom Kippur? They try to explain it there in the book. Well, he felt a responsibility, blah, blah, blah. No, he didn't pitch on Yom Kippur because he's Jewish. And when Yom Kippur came around, he felt his Jewishness. Once you feel your Jewishness, there's no discussion. makes sense, it doesn't make sense, it's going to help the community, it's going to improve Jewish pride. It doesn't matter. Once you feel your Jewishness, it's Modeh Ani all over again. There are so many layers of suffering and confusion and disillusionment. We're thick-skinned, and it keeps getting thicker. But the guy who's immune to Yom Kippur will not be immune to something else. Something is going to remind him he's Jewish, and then there's no discussion. It's Modeh Ani. So that's what we know about the resurrection. That's what we know about the 13th principle of our faith. Believing in this changes your life? Absolutely. Absolutely. It changes our opinion of life today. It certainly gives us a whole different picture of the future. It's a necessary part of our mental makeup. It's not just a religious concept. Now, some people actually say this every day. They go through the 13 principles. I believe in perfect faith and so on. But you don't have to say it. That's the whole point. It's there, built in, hardwired in our souls. And being aware of it helps. But there's nothing you need to do to make it any more real. Because it can't be any more real. You have a consciousness of your soul identity, not your body identity. So I guess you'll remember the good stuff, but not the bad, because the bad becomes irrelevant. So the soulful things that the body did, it will remember, but not the unholy stuff. And I guess this explains Simchas Torah, when we dance with the Torah and never even open it. The mitzvah of Simchas Torah is to dance with the Torah. There's no special mitzvah in reading it. Which is, again, kind of like Modeh Ani, you don't even mention God's name. Dance with the Torah, but you don't open it and study it. Because we're talking here about imperatives. We're talking here about the nature of our relationship with Torah. Not what we think, not what we feel, but what is. And on such a time, we simply dance with it. What does it say? That's not for today. That's not for Simchas Torah. Simchas Torah is not a debate. It's simply a revelation of what we are. And Simchas Torah, in some ways, has a greater impact than Yom Kippur. For some people. So that's what we're dealing with in this season. We're dealing with imperatives. Maybe that's why a sukkah is the one mitzvah that even men can do with their entire body. Women go to a mikveh. It's a mitzvah you do with your whole body. Men don't get to do that. We blow the shofar, we put on the tefillin, we wear the tzitzis. It's not the whole body. But sukkah, the entire body. So in sukkah, there's no debate. Your head, your foot, same thing. No debate. It's an imperative. How do you do a mitzvah with your whole body? Don't mention God's name. Don't open the book and read it. Just do what you are. And that involves the whole body. And all parts of the body equally. So if a person is in the sukkah with one leg, and that ain't good enough. You got to be in the sukkah. Head and toes are the same. So enjoy the what's left of the holidays, because soon it's going to be weekday. We're going to go back to normal life. And we have to pack in a lot of experience and a lot of feeling during these days to carry us until Pesach. That's a long stretch. A cold stretch. So we got to absorb a lot of joy and a lot of enthusiasm to be enough to last until Pesach. There's one little detail about resurrection. Whenever the time comes, some people are still going to be alive. What happens to them? The Gemara says that certain wicked people, their souls will be burnt and there'll be nothing left. What that means is not that they will be destroyed. They will be cleansed through the burning so that there's nothing unholy left. But not that the soul can be destroyed. Certainly not by fire. In the same way, dying and being resurrected doesn't have to entail actual physical death. When a person feels like nothing, that's death. So if a person can achieve a humility that really makes him unimportant to himself, that's enough. He's ready for the resurrection. So those people who are still alive when the time comes for the resurrection, the Medrash says they will die for a moment and then be resurrected. So Chassidus says, what does it mean, die for a moment? What does that mean? What does that mean? People are always saying that for a moment there they felt like they had died. So what does it mean, die for a moment? So Chassidus says that this dying for a moment doesn't mean physical death, but very quick. Dying for a moment means dying in concept, in principle. That humility can be considered, because how do we describe humility? We say in the Shemona Esrei, "V'nafshi ka'ofer lakoil tihiyah." What does humility mean? That my soul is humble like dust before others. Well, from dust to dust. So feeling that humble is like going back to the earth. So that kind of a humility suffices for the resurrection. And I think that what that means is something like this. When a person thinks of himself, normally we think of ourselves as a body and a soul. Who am I? I'm my body and my soul. When a person is humble, it's not his soul that is humbled. There's no reason to be humble about your soul. On the contrary, about your soul, you should not be humble. The humility is about the body, about the physical being. If a person comes to a stage of humility where when he thinks of himself, he is conscious only of his neshama, but not of his body, he's ready for the resurrection. He's ready for a new body with a whole new kind of life. So if we're alive when the resurrection comes, which is supposed to be about 40 years after Mashiach, but those 40 years, according to the Rebbe, have been used up since Mashiach is so late. So he's already into those 40 years. So when he comes, it won't be 40 years. So if we're alive when Mashiach comes, obviously our bodies will be much less important to us than our souls. And that's humility. And that enables us to be resurrected. And we will know all about it when it finally happens. Shalom Aleichem. How are you? I do a lot of talking, a lot of Zooming, many classes, many subjects. But that's all formal stuff. Hopefully good stuff, but formal. We also have a Wednesday night meeting that's more informal and kind of Hamish. If you want to join us for that kind of an event, interactive, time for questions and so on, if you want to join us for this side of conversation, click on the link below and join us every Wednesday night at 9 o'clock. Well, maybe not every Wednesday night, but we try to make it every Wednesday night at 9 o'clock, a more informal chat which can be more enjoyable at times than the formal stuff. So check it out. Click on the link and join us. Try it. You'll like it.